Okay, the meeting will now come to order. We'll begin with introduction of members, and we will not be seating any alternates tonight. So we'll begin with town staff. So here in the room, we have Dawn.
Dawn Dyke.
And,
Secretary.
thank you. And on Zoom, we have Mike.
Yep, Mike D'Amato, interim or consulting planner, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else for town staff? Okay, for commission members, we'll do introductions starting on my left.
Victoria Chetchet.
Bob Ellsworth.
Chantal Foster.
Carolyn Freeman.
Robert Taylor.
Okay, next item is to accept the agenda. May I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
And a second?
Seconded.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, the agenda is accepted as presented. First item is a public hearing for application 21-15, 264 Freestone Avenue, request for special permit for plastics manufacturing business to occupy one unit within the existing building. Application of American Precision Mold Incorporated, property of Global Freestone LLC. Assessors map 20, lot 179, zone I, industrial. May I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
And a second?
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, public hearing for application 21-15 is now open. Would someone like to speak on behalf of this application? If you would, approach the podium and, over here. And state your name and address, please. Yep.
Richard Rowlinson, 30 Cove Road, Moodus, Connecticut. And
Did you get that? The last name, please?
Rowlinson, E-R-L-A-N-D, that's the name. So I'm the owner and president of American Precision Mold, Inc. And we are asking the commission to consider our application proposal request for a special permit to open a plastics manufacturing facility occupying one unit within the existing building at location of 264 Freestone Avenue, Portland. And the use would be for manufacturing plastic injection molded parts. We will receive raw material and parts would be injection molded in the process and then shipped out to the customer. There would be 1 to 2 employees as well as a supervisor working at this location. And the typical hours of operation would be from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday, and pretty normal hours. And then in regard to the parking, we could park in front of the unit we are occupying, as well as on the west side of the building if needed. This would be acceptable with the fire marshal. I spoke to Andy Goff in regard to it, and he's all okay with that. We would not have any access to or use of the sanitary sewer system, with the exception of the use of they have a community bathroom in the facility there. And the basic objective would be to create a clean, friendly, and safe environment for all who work here. And all the necessary permits and inspections would also be done. And the fire marshal, the one thing that he noted was he wanted to have 2 fire extinguishers within the complex, and that they'd be inspected annually. So we're all in favor of that. And follow any guidance that you can give us or anything you can add to it. The presented should have a shop floor layout of the space. And that's basically the layout of the equipment. And we listed some pictures for the type of equipment that would be there. It's exactly the equipment that would be. And we actually, the project that we're trying to get going with here is actually being molded across the street. Precision Plastic Products
Oh,
right
really?
now. It's been an ongoing project for like 20 years. But the orders have ramped up, and Ed Organic, who's all in favor of this, he's been a business member of Portland for many years. He's just all in favor of us taking this on and doing it here. We have another location in East Hampton that we keep, do some small part molding there, as well as been building plastic injection molds themselves for like over 30 years. So we've been in business quite a while, and this is an expansion of what we already have.
Great.
And the building is industrially zoned, and it at one time was zoned, I guess, for manufacturing, but it was changed. And I guess that's the main reason why we're here tonight, because we're going through a special permit. That's about pretty much it. Do you have any
Okay.
questions?
Yeah, any questions from commission members? We'll start with commission members.
How long will your completed, I guess,
Get set up?
no, how long, once you've molded something,
Oh,
how
okay.
long do you keep it in there?
We typically are building like 2 skids, and then we're shipping them out. So we can probably, I would say that the parts go out weekly. So the turnaround from raw material to finished parts are leaving weekly. That's what we're doing right now.
So does a truck come and pick them up?
We have a delivery truck. Yeah.
And so could you explain a little bit about each of the
Process?
yeah, and the machinery?
The
Because I
machinery.
see you have like temperature controller, and I know you gave
Right.
us but if you know
The
how
large
it works.
machine is the injection molding machine,
Okay.
and there's a mold that goes inside of that machine. And plastic is heated in the barrel, and then injection, under injection pressure, it's forced into the mold. And then when it sets, the mold opens up and injects the part out when you have a finished part. The part that we're actually making is is a water tank. A small part, probably about this big. And it goes on a water-activated paper tape dispenser. It's where the brushes go in to wet the tape. It's paper tape, like you get on packages when you get your order online.
Huh.
So it actually, the machine actually
Bob, I didn't get
is
a
a
copy
tape
of the
machine
floor
for
plan.
those
May I look
packages.
at yours? See,
There's a
Chantel
variety
has
of
it, but I
different
don't.
customers.
Does that process produce any waste?
It's minimal, and we actually either reprocess it. In your pictures, I don't have a granulator on here, but we do have one, and we can actually grind plastic to scrap, and we try to reuse it. We're allowed to use up to 20% reuse. So it goes back into it, and then some material, like purchase, wouldn't be doable, wouldn't be able to be processed, so we recycle. We have a couple different recycling places to take it to.
And is there any, you're not using any water in this whole process?
Yes.
Oh.
In the temperature controller and the chiller, both have water in them, but they're closed loop. The system is closed loop, so it's not gonna go into the sewer system or anything like that.
And when you're accessing your unit, there's a big door on the outside, but you
Right.
can also get in through
From the
that
inside.
entrance there that runs down the middle of the building, and then But you'd be delivering stuff through the big door
Big door, right.
and getting rid of
Just
stuff?
open it right up and back the truck up to it.
Okay.
And there's a walkout door. Is isn't there presently? It might be on your prints. I really don't have the,
It does show one, but,
yeah, oh, okay.
Yeah.
On the,
but I didn't see
building.
one. I didn't see one on the building.
Is it in the
Right,
other?
we're putting one in.
Yeah,
They're installed. Right.
okay.
That's getting done.
And is there any need, I think you did address all of the things that the fire marshal asked, but is there any need for some kind of emergency, dousing thing if somebody gets stuff on them?
This is different.
Or, I guess, well,
The
no.
building has a-
Okay, but I was thinking of something like, when you have people working with chemicals or weird stuff that
Right.
sometimes you might need to get doused on. So I was just asking if that's something that would ever be needed for the type of stuff that you're doing.
Yes, we would have first aid kits,
Mhm.
a first aid kit, I should say, available, so if you get cut or something.
Mhm.
But the hot plastic, you don't get near it.
Mhm.
It's contained in the machine, and the machine is fully guarded. It's all set up OSHA approved.
Mhm.
So, there's no risk. And it has safety switches on it, so you're not gonna get pinched in the machine or anything like that. But, the parts are like finished parts when they drop out of the machine. They're warm, but it's not like melting plastic
Mhm.
that would get on you. But we would have a first aid kit on hand.
So with your lease, you have how many parking spaces?
There isn't anything described in the lease, but Andy Goff, the fire marshal, told me that you could park 2 vehicles by the overhead door because there is no fire lane there. It's not like Stop
Right.
and Shop where you have a
Right.
fire lane. He says you're permitted to do that, and he says there's plenty of parking on the west side of the building, which is actually, when we met there, we actually all parked there. He says you'd be able to grab a spot there too. It's just gonna be a few people.
But if you have 2 cars parked by the overhead door,
Right.
then you don't have,
Can't get the truck in.
you can't get the trucks in and out.
Right.
So, so my concern
Sure.
with this
Parking.
building is parking for everybody as it fills up.
Right.
Right, and so if you're, if you have 2 spots
Right.
and those are in front of your door and the building starts to fill up
Right.
and you need 3 spots every day for your employees.
Somebody could move their car if necessary and let the truck in. And there's all kinds of, it's mostly storage, so there's isn't anybody going in and out of there. It's not
Okay.
like having an adjacent business and there's all filled up with cars. There's all these bays that you could find a spot for a few minutes just to load the truck and take off. And the truck might actually be one of the vehicles, one of the 3 vehicles parked there.
Yeah.
Because it might be kept in East Hampton.
I'm not familiar with how many spots there are on the west end of the building. Could you,
I'd say
like,
there's probably 8 or so.
8?
There's quite a few. There's some other businesses over there too that are occupying, but they aren't, the parking isn't all occupied. He parked there, I parked there, that's actually where we parked, because we had a key by a door by the loading dock there. That was the only key I have. And they gave, and that's where we went in, so we were on that side. And there was more parking available at the time.
so, but this isn't like a typical storage place, right, where you're sharing air with your neighbors, correct? Or is it?
The way it's set up right now is it's divided. It's our unit is divided off, and I think, I don't want to speak for all the businesses there, but it's just by visual, from what I gathered, everybody's sealed off. It's not, everybody isn't working in a big room, it's all sealed off.
All the
Each
way up to
individual
the
business,
ceiling.
and so would ours. The only thing it has right now is it has a section of the wall, one of the walls, towards the center of the building is still left open because the building's heated and apparently air conditioned to a certain degree. They don't keep it like at 70, but it's probably at 50 or something like that, so it's not freezing in there. And that wall section will be finished off, and they're putting in heat and air conditioning for our unit, and then we'll take over, you know, the responsibility of paying for the heat. But right now it's partially open so that the air can flow in there and the whole building gets heated.
And do you guys mind if I ask a few more?
Be my guest.
So that's not completed now,
No, it's going to be
but you're
completed this
in,
month.
it's going to be completed before you begin operations?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to get, well, that's part of his responsibility, the landlord. But everybody's gonna have to get permits to do this work. I have to get permits. We have to install a electrical service. It'll be on us. So, and he's gonna put in the heat and air conditioning. That's in the lease, and the exit door is also in the lease. He's gonna do that. So the work will be done probably over a month's time if we get approved. And then everything will be completed. It'll be approved by the building department. Nothing's going to be left open once we start operating.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The building department will have to CO it. But all, like I said, all the permits, I've talked to Liz about it. She says, you got to make sure you get all your permits and take all the measures for inspections.
But if he doesn't start the work, then, I mean, there's nothing to say that if he doesn't start the work, then he's not gonna actually need a permit, right? Has he pulled a permit to do the work? Do you know?
No, nobody knows because we haven't been approved yet.
Right.
It's up to you guys tonight, so that's why we're here. We haven't signed any lease. Nothing has been done. We've all been talking.
Oh, okay.
He's gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. I even have a drafted lease, but we have not notarized it or signed it or anything because it's all pending on the outcome of this meeting because we need a special permit.
Understood.
That's where it comes down. And the space, like I said, it is zoned industrial, and it was manufacturing at one time for a long time. Just that it got changed to warehouse and kind of, I don't think, he didn't know we were coming, and other people, they just sort of came along. And this is now a special permit because of the situation. That's everything I know.
I guess I'm stuck on the wall because of the fumes and the potential of your neighbor sharing airspace with you. And so kind of like, for me, it would be important that heat and air conditioning get put in.
The air conditioning?
Well, that your ventilation is separate from your neighbors. And,
Right, it will be.
Right.
I know it will be, the heating and air conditioning, because we're all sealed off right now, the whole unit, except for in the 22-foot width.
Yeah.
There's probably 8 or 10 feet of opening to the whole big building, so that heat can get in there, because there isn't any heat in there now. But he'll be sealing that off, so we'll be fully enclosed with our own heating and air conditioning system. That's the thing.
Thank you.
Sure. Any further questions by commission members? Rob? Yeah.
So I was looking at the machine specs, and it looks like it has an oil tank reservoir. Is that something that, and it looks like it's something that's refillable, so it gets consumed. So I guess my question, two things, is that you're gonna, I mean, probably be keeping extra oil on hand, and two, do you have any plans or precautions in place for any event of any spills? since you don't have immediate access to water.
You know what? I'm not sure which area of the machine you're talking about.
Let's see. I was looking through the.
See, this
Because
is the
you're
part I
right,
didn't
it is
get.
it's a hybrid machine. It's, runs by hydraulics
Yeah.
and also.
Here's the whole package, I guess. Sorry. It's something we got late.
So, it was on the spec sheet. It was,
Oh, the spec sheet?
yeah, it was
The
just saying that,
hydraulics?
yeah, it had like
It
a.
has a hydraulic reservoir. I wasn't sure if you were talking about
2113.
copper. It might
Oh,
have
oh,
had a
oh,
picture of
sorry.
copper or something on it.
Sorry.
Because I have that.
Yeah, no, it was, it's talking about like oil level alarm, lubrication, refueling alarm, so it's obviously something that you'd have to do and refill at some point, which means that if you're
It should have
handling
been
it,
in the
there's an
packet.
Yeah,
opportunity
I
to
know,
fill it.
it's all right.
You shouldn't have to refill it.
Okay.
Once you fill it, it should maintain its level.
Okay.
You know?
But
And
is there
it
any?
does have, like a grease system, an automatic lube system.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
We don't have any of these machines present, so,
Mhm.
but by the specs, you're right. Because it is a hybrid machine, it has servo motors, but it also has hydraulic system.
They do make those absorbent kind of snakes that you can have on hand if you have failure, hydraulic failure, or an oil
Oh,
spill.
an oil spill?
And you can just, you know, if you keep that on hand,
Right,
you can use them.
okay,
You know, they're just like fat.
right.
It's almost like a sandbag, but they're not heavy.
I know what you
And you
mean.
can
Right.
surround an area if you have a spill. It might be a
Right.
good idea to have something like that on hand to contain
Um,
anything that might happen.
Truthfully, we have another hydraulic machine at our other facility, and we've had a bag of Speedy Dry for like 30 years, and we've never used it, but that's what we have on hand. And if you use that, then it becomes contaminated material, of course, so you have to deal with it. But we've never used 2 grain or something. But
Knock
the
on
Speedy
wood
Dry is
now.
what we have. Right, I know.
And
knock
you
on
have
wood.
it
But
on
it's
hand.
there
Now
for
that
a
it's come
reason,
up, but right,
because if you need
exactly.
it, you better have it there.
Right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And we could look into that as a Speedy Dry.
Just having something on
Yeah,
hand.
something on hand.
Yeah.
You're right.
Would something like that be kept like near the fire extinguishers, or is that
Um,
something that like, cause it was just the.
If something,
The
if
layout
ever-
was kinda
if
really-
something ever went there,
Mhm.
if something ever went with the hydraulics, I suppose if you had a fire in the facility, the machine would probably be shut off by that time.
Mm.
But, so, machine shut off, now you don't have hydraulic pressure. So there's hoses on the machine, and they're full of oil, and that could present a problem. But if there was a fire, probably wouldn't be trying to put speed right now to get on.
Yeah.
By the time the hoses burn off.
Well, I was just more talking about like, 'cause you, the map that you provided us doesn't
Sure.
have like anything like that, that you'd say like, this is where we would store this, safety, safety product.
Right.
So I was just wondering if that would be something that you would keep like next to, around in the same area? Is that?
It could be kept by the fire extinguisher. I put the fire extinguishers located by the 2 doors,
Mhm.
one on each door, and that could be there. Probably not right next to the door, but we'll have we could get a steel drum and get a bag of Speedy Dry, put it in the steel drum, have it there in case of an emergency. It's always good to have it on hand in case you need it, but hopefully you don't. It's like the fire extinguisher,
Mhm.
same thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions by commission members? Any questions from members of the public, either here in the room or on Zoom?
There is Ann Vino is giving support to the fair housing, but nothing on this.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I guess if you are on Zoom and you'd like to ask a question, there is a chat button at the bottom, or simply raise your hand. Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion to close the public hearing, please?
So,
And a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, public hearing for application 21-15 is closed. Any further questions, discussion amongst commission members?
I would like to have, oh, but that wouldn't be discussing the motion, right?
If you would like something added to the motion,
Yeah.
then we should, yes.
I think I would like to just have something added about the wall being closed before operations begin. That 20 feet of open wall between the different spaces.
Okay, so that would be a condition of approval, right?
Yeah, I'd like to see that come from,
And
make sure the landlord gets on that before they.
how about, can you come up with some nice
Um,
concise wording for that, that we can add to the motion?
Wasn't expecting that.
well,
This would be,
well, that the unit be contained for heating and.
Self-contained.
Self-contained for heating and
And-
heating and cooling and no
Ventilation.
exchange of.
No air exchange
With
with
other
adjoining
units.
units.
Okay, does that sound like,
unit
Is
be
that-
self-contained for HVAC prior to,
prior to operation?
operation, yep. You want me to read that again, Dawn? Okay, so it would be condition number 5? That the unit be self-contained for HVAC prior to operation.
And what is that, the verification of the 3 spaces? Verification means like a written something from the landlord saying that they have 3 designated spaces? Is that condition number 1? Because that's been a concern with this as businesses start to move into this complex, right?
Right.
So what does that mean? Must submit verification of the 3 spaces, dedicated parking. I mean, obviously the 2 in front of this building that's 2, but where's the verification that there's a designated 3rd spot?
The place, I mean, the area does have a lot of
Yeah.
available parking,
Yeah.
so it's not like it's a very limited thing, but it's true that over time, it could fill up with other things and
And there
parking.
might be nothing left for somebody else
I would think
moving
that that
in.
would be something that the applicant would have an agreement with his landlord on, that there would be a designated, that he is assured of having 3 spots.
Assured of having the
Because
spots,
there's plenty of room there,
Yeah.
right now,
right.
right. Okay, just wondering.
Okay, then, Chantel, could I ask you to read the motion, please?
Motion to approve application 2115, 264 Freestone Avenue, request for special permit for change of use within an existing building to plastics manufacturing. Applicant Richard Erlinson, American Precision Mold, Inc., property owner Wayne Rand, Global Freestone LLC, assessors map 20, lot 179, zone industrial. Approval is based on plans as shown on annotated plans entitled New Storage Area prepared by Blue Moon Design and dated December 27th, 2021, with an annotation provided by applicant indicating intended use of Unit E11, as well as Planning and Zoning General Application Form with the following attachments: protective narrative letter provided by Richard Erlinson, proposed shop floor layout for American Precision Mold, Inc., Whitman Battenfield equipment specifications, LS hybrid injection molding machine equipment specifications, and based on testimony presented and subject to the following instructions and conditions integral to this application. 1, the applicant must submit verification of the 3 spaces of dedicated parking for the proposed use as per comments from memorandum of Jeffrey L. Jacobson, P.E., Town Engineering Consultant, dated April 13th, 2022. 2, the applicant must comply with the terms of the correspondence between applicant Richard Erlinson and the Deputy Fire Marshal Andy Goff between April 14th and May 2nd, particularly regarding representations about the sprinkler system and stored materials. 3, any proposed signage will require a signage permit that must conform to zoning regulation 8.4. 4, that the certified letter of approval be filed on the land records within 180 days per zoning regulation section 10.5.2.f.2.a. This requirement must be met prior to the issuance of a zoning permit. And 5, that the unit be self-contained for HVAC prior to operation. Reasons: the proposal conforms to section 6.1 and 10.4.b of the zoning regulations and is reflective of the goals of the Portland Plan of Conservation and Development.
Okay, this is Bob. I vote aye. Victoria?
Aye.
Chantel?
Aye.
Carolyn?
Aye.
Rob?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the application is approved.
Somebody second it?
Congratulations.
Did somebody second it?
Second one.
Second the motion? Can you,
We skipped that, okay.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, thanks, Rob, for bailing me out.
thank you.
Okay, congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now have our regular meeting, and listed as application 21-13, 264 Freestone Avenue. Request for site plan review for excavation work to construct a new 18,000 square foot building for contractor trade units. Application and property of Global Freestone LLC, Assessors Map 20, Lot 179, Zone I, Industrial. So I know there's been a lot of back and forth regarding this application. Is there anyone here to speak on behalf of that application? I know we did not prepare a motion in anticipation of further back and forth, so I'm
So
assuming-
somebody must have reached out to the applicant, maybe?
Yes, I believe Mike was going to.
Yeah, if I could just jump in,
Yeah.
I communicated with them that, based on the level of comments that were left to be outstanding, my assumption was that they were working to prepare revisions and a response to particularly Judge Jacobson's comment memo. And I heard back late this afternoon that that's what they were working on, and that they felt they would be ready for the next meeting in May.
Okay, so this application will be tabled until our next meeting. Thanks, Mike.
But
Okay, next item is to receive in applications. I see none. So next item would be staff report. And I'll just run through these. If anybody has anything to comment on them, stop me. Town Center Village District reviews, bond reductions, zoning regulation work group, correspondence.
Well, I just wanted to ask people if they had, if they had a chance to review the information from the Lower Cog River meeting that Liz sent out about the cannabis. I thought it was kind of interesting that a bunch of different towns are in all sorts of different, stages of that, and I thought it was just interesting to look at where everybody was. So there is a spreadsheet if you're interested. And then the other thing that they talked about at the regional meeting was the affordable housing plan that Meg is gonna talk to us about tonight. So,
Okay.
and I resent the link and everything, so.
Sam Gold and Janice Elam are around from
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
thank you. Anything else for correspondence? Okay, next item is the affordable housing plan. And I believe we will have some discussion about that tonight. If you would, Meg, step up to the podium so we can hear you. Yep.
I believe, and I don't know if Megan, do we have anybody coming in from Rivercog? Sam is.
Yes, I'm Sam Gold, the Executive Director
Okay,
of Rivercog.
okay, thank you, because I didn't,
Jen.
thank you, I didn't hear from Megan, so good, okay, so, I spoke with John Guzkowski, and he asked Liz to send out a shorter version of the 79-page document that I had hyperlinked to the previous week or previous meeting. Basically, you have the meat of the proposal in front of you, and hopefully you were able to look at it and hopefully have some questions. I know there were some questions that I couldn't answer at the last meeting, and so hopefully we can direct them to Sam, and that he can help us, guide us. The what you want to kind of be looking at, I think, are the objectives and strategies and action steps that the town, it's recommended that the town would consider. Obviously, some of these things are not planning and zoning. For instance, updating a website to make sure that zoning information is on there would require our IT department or whoever does the website to get that information from planning and zoning. So, you know, I don't think anybody would disagree that putting out further information for greater transparency would be helpful in defining what affordable housing is and how the zoning in Portland affects those requirements for affordable housing.
That was my one question or comment, Meg, was that it seems like there's a lot of action here that's required by the town, some by the planning and zoning. So I believe you had told us last meeting that this will be presented to the Board of Selectmen as well, or it has been?
The Board of Selectmen, once you approve the parts of it that can be approved by planning and zoning, then the Board of Selectmen would be putting their final okay on it, giving it their blessing.
Okay.
And the recommendations for the town part would just be to have greater transparency and informational, educational opportunities for people to understand what affordable housing is. It's not low-income housing. It's not, you know, HUD subsidized housing. It's housing for people that are that meet a very strict criteria of a percentage of the median income in the county or in the town. And then, for instance, a family of four would have to make under $79,000 a year in order to afford to live in Portland. So there's a very, very strict formula for determining that.
It sounds like one of the recommendations is to establish a new committee, housing committee.
Possibly a housing committee could be shared with the regional or you know, neighboring towns or whatever. But yep, that's a recommendation, and that would have to be taken up with the Board of Selectmen as to whether or not they would, or the planning department or economic development. Somebody would have to take some responsibility for putting that together. We do have a housing authority here in Portland right now, which manages Quarry View and not Quarry View. Quarry Heights and Chatham Court.
I guess I'm just confused on exactly what it is we're supposed to be.
Well, let's take a look. I mean, the first strategy says to expand the knowledge of the town's existing accessory dwelling unit regulations. Mm-hmm. And basically it's stated that Portland does allow ADUs. What's an ADU? It could be an in-law apartment. It could be a building separate, located on the property for a family member or non-family member that could be rented. There may be zoning restrictions on that. There could be existing zoning restrictions right now that wouldn't allow for separate buildings. I think, you know, septics and water and whatnot would maybe preclude having I don't know, let's say a 400 square foot unit. What would that look like? You know, how many square feet would a separate building look like? And is it possible that the zoning regulations already restrict that because of sewer and septic requirements? You know, if somebody wanted to convert a garage and make an apartment over a garage, would that come under the definition of an ADU? It would.
Yes.
Is that possible to do that? If I own a garage right now on my property and want to make the second floor into an apartment, do our zoning regulations?
Well, we did approve one.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah, we did.
So those are,
Yeah.
Something like that.
right,
yeah.
so that would be, and if there are further actions to further look at the rest of the zoning laws in Portland, you know, in the other areas, in the rural areas or whatever, I think, you know, that would be an action item for this P&Z to take up, would be to review any existing regulations that would allow or not allow. So that would be that could be potentially an action item.
So that's what we're trying to come up with?
That's what we're
action
trying. That's what we're
items?
trying to come up with, and there's a 5-year window on this, so that in 5 years, within probably about 3.5 years, there'll be a review by somebody, planning and zoning, or by the Board of Selectmen, or by the housing coordinator. But somebody will sit down and say, did we meet the 10% criteria that the state would like us to hit? We are at 8.1% with affordable housing units. Our inventory is very tight, but we do have 8.1% of the available housing is affordable. The cap would be 10, could be 15 if we got that far, but 10 would be the minimum. So we really need to go about 1.9% more in terms of housing units. So that's, yeah, the action items would be to pick some things that we could do that would be workable, and then review it at 5 years and see where we are, and I'm sure we'll be asked to update that affordable housing plan. Sam, am I talking around here? Am I making any sense?
Thank you, Meg, for presenting that. And good evening, commission members. I'm very happy to be here. In full disclosure, I was asked to fill in for John Guskowski from Penny Planning, and for Megan Chuflis, who's our project manager for Vermont. So I'm glad I could be here to fill in for both of them. So what is being asked of the Planning and Zoning Commission and of the town is to review the recommendations in this draft Section 830J plan. About 5 years ago, Section 830J was added to the general statutes that directed towns to create a affordable housing plan every 5 years. Rivercog was able to find money in last year's budget to be able to pay for a consultant to assist our towns with fulfilling this new mandate. A handful of towns in our region were able to get funding from the State Department of Housing. The vast majority of towns, but that money was very meager amount, and the vast majority of towns did not receive the grant funding. So I was happy that the COG was able to support this effort. The 830J statute is very concise, and it says the town shall adopt one of these plans, and the plan shall identify approaches to expand affordable housing in the town, and that the plan needs to be adopted by June of this year, and then updated within 5 years. So pretty open as to what can be in it. The definition of affordable housing is based upon the definition set forth in the previous section, 830G, which is the state's Affordable Housing Appeals Act, which identifies a number of different ways of having housing count towards being affordable. In general, what the state counts as affordable is housing that we know is restricted to always be affordable. So something that's deed restricted, something that's publicly owned, such as units that are owned by the town's housing authority. Also, under consideration for counting towards affordable housing are homes that are purchased with subsidized government mortgages, through CHFA that offers a number of first-time homeowner mortgages. Also, in rural parts of the region, they're eligible for the U.S. Department of Agriculture mortgages. Those also would count. So there's some basic approaches that we are recommending for all of our towns, such as of course maximizing the number of CHFA mortgages in your town. That's just an education program to help residents with their subsidized and first-time homeowner mortgages, but also making better use of regulations that you already have in the books. Portland has a very good accessory dwelling unit regulation, and encouraging people to be able to use that. Of course, unfortunately in this, an accessory dwelling unit would not count towards the count for affordable housing unless it was deed restricted to be rented for a certain price. Nevertheless, this is intended for the towns and cities of Connecticut to show progress on addressing the issue of affordable housing. It does not set any hard threshold or goal for the town of Portland, but it is intended as being a roadmap for the town to follow to help address the issue. When it comes to the question that was voiced about adoption, the statute says the town shall adopt. So if there are any elements of this that you don't feel comfortable with, I would suggest that maybe the motion would be to endorse and have endorse those items, as opposed to if you don't feel comfortable with adopting the recommendations or approaches, specific approaches. I think that might be a good way of dealing with that.
I think that would
and allow the Board of Selectmen to be the one who adopts those items.
I think that's a good point, that endorsing would, you would endorse whatever is here, and then the Board of Selectmen would obviously actualize the plan, and that would be where it would go, because they're reallocating resources, financial resources for all of this. And we could go through item by item, or you can, if you have questions that you've developed from what you've looked at.
Well, again, my questions were more along the lines of, I mean, I think, I look at this and I agree with all of this, so I can endorse it, but I also say, well, who is doing this, you know, and that's really that's my question.
Right. Again, it's a town plan,
Yeah.
so it would be the town. But there are some things like, you know, if we look at number 3, it says consider incentives for deed restricted affordable units in new developments. That may be something that you didn't think about, or maybe, and I'm not sure what that looks like in terms of town planning. Maybe somebody, Matt could comment on that, or Sam could. But I'm guessing, you know, if you were building new housing, and you would allow for them to have deed restricted units on their property, if that were the case, this might be something that the planning and zoning would say, yeah, we're going to look at that for providing for in-law apartments, or for something that would be deed restricted in a new development. Is that kind of where I'm going with that? Does that make sense? I'm brand new at this, so some of the stuff is beyond my level of expertise. But would that be something that would be considered, or a smaller, within a new development, maybe a smaller unit of smaller houses? I don't know what that would look like.
So I'll just comment on that. That is something which the town, through its through planning and development, could adopt. They could negotiate, or the town itself could incentivize developers putting deed restrictions on units. I'll just give an example of the town of Old Saybrook. They've had a track record of doing friendly, what they call friendly 830G applications. So 830G is the mechanism, the law, the Hills Act law, the developers can use to go around a municipality's zoning. well, the town of Old Saybrook realized, well, we could do a friendly process with them. They use 830G to go above and around the town zoning, but work cooperatively with the developer to negotiate elements that are desirable to the town and not make it adversarial. Unfortunately, in most cases, in most places, 830G is a rather adversarial process, and that's, I think, one of its largest defects. But there could be other town processes and incentives to incentivize growing affordable housing in Portland and having those numbers count towards 830G definition. Nevertheless, the goal here is to identify the approaches that the town supports and is committing to making some effort to do. So it's very important that the items that you list in this plan are things that you are comfortable with.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to hear that you're asking the question of who is doing what, because that is a very important question if you're going to make progress over the next 5 years. I can speak on behalf of Rivercog that we intend to support our towns on their plans over the course of their 5 years, and to be using our resources like the Regional Planning Committee and maybe potentially a Regional Housing Committee or potentially a regional housing person that might be with the COG to assist towns with projects and with implementation.
I know one of the things that Mary had mentioned before she left was talking about the adaptive reuse opportunities for the town, and
Mhm.
and that's a big. I understand that it's an issue with churches and maybe schools and that sort of thing, and
Mhm.
I mean, I think all of these things are good ideas. I just
I get
What to do with them.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I
Do we
think the
look to
first
see
three
how they-
items, really are planning and zoning kind of in your wheelhouse, if you will, because they would require approval by planning and zoning to go forward, whether the regulations are in place or they have to be changed. You know, the refurbishing of buildings into affordable housing, it certainly would be a planning and zoning issue before it would become, I think, it would.
Yeah, I guess the
Because
way-
you would be rezoning something perhaps.
Right. The way I see it working would be the town planner would probably be the person taking the lead on a lot of these activities. And, you know, the zoning commission supporting them and, you know, assisting the town planner whenever needed.
Right.
That's how I see it working.
I think it's a hand-in-hand kind of a thing, because, right, somebody would approach the town planner, or the town planner would look at it, say, we're gonna do this, we're gonna look at the change in a particular building or zone, let's say in a zone. You know, you don't wanna get rid of the rural area that's zoned for rural, because that would preclude people using the affordable agriculture mortgages that come with with living in a rural area beyond CHFA, correct? In other words, there's two federally funded mortgage programs. One is for the rural areas, if you meet that criteria, and then CHFA is the other. So,
That is correct.
Yeah.
And I'll just reiterate, our recently completed regional plan and conservation development strongly supports redevelopment and reuse of existing buildings and sites. In general, our towns have not been growing very much in population. In some cases, they've been shrinking in population. So we want to make better use of vacant buildings as they come up, as opposed to building new, cutting down forest or building houses on farmland, just because we don't want to spread out expensive infrastructure to house a smaller number of people over a larger amount of land.
right.
And also, we're also hopeful that adaptive reuse of existing buildings could be done for less money than building the greenfield site.
Agreed. And then if you
So
look.
would we just, so would we, what you're asking us is to kind of look at the current zoning regulations and see if
Well,
there's some, in conjunction with
I-
the town planner, to see if there's
I think it's
something
kind
that
of
would
putting the cart
support-
before the horse, but I
Yeah.
think, you know, being aware of these, particularly these first three, you know, considering incentives for deed restricted development, I mean, that would certainly be a Board of Selectmen approval, I think, but it may come here first, it may come from the town planner, but I think just accepting and endorsing those first three would say, yeah, we agree that we will do those things as it occurs. And then the town, it's up to the town and the town planner to seek those opportunities that might refurbish a building that is being closed, whether it's a firehouse or church or whatever, or school.
But my understanding on I mean, we're kind of like, we're talking about all these different things.
Right.
But my understanding on the adaptive reuse, it was that we need to look at our regulations because certain things wouldn't be allowed in certain I mean, it just would be, you know, not allowed by our regulations. So we need to look at our regulations to you know, how does that get addressed in regulations? I mean, we have a place where there's a school and the school is in a residential area and let's say, you know, the school is going to be sold to some senior, you know, some nursing home or something like that.
Sure.
And then would the nursing home be allowed to go in there? And no, they wouldn't be because it's a residential area. So what do? Do we change our regulations in advance to accommodate that kind of thing? Or how does that work? I don't understand
I
how it
don't think
works.
you need to change the regulations, but I think you need to be aware and to, if the opportunity were to arise, let's say you sell off the firehouse number 3 up there and on the back of the property, you know, back of the town, you know, could that be a house? Could that be a multifamily dwelling? You know, is that zoned for that now? Probably not. And again, you'd have to look at your regulations and see whether or not it's beneficial to the town.
But that's what I'm saying. How do you reflect that in your regulations?
Well-
That's what I don't understand.
I think, my opinion, go ahead, Sam. I think.
I just would like to say that, so I think the point right now, the point we're at right now is identifying approaches that are approaches that you can endorse or support
Okay.
for the town. And the issue about a specific project, let's say redevelopment of a school or a firehouse, those are important questions. And we can provide assistance with model regulations from other towns for adaptive reuse of historic buildings. We have across the state, we have examples of schools and old warehouses that can be used in housing or to other uses. And a number of towns have adaptive reuse districts that allow for some flexibility. I think at this point we're looking for the approaches that you feel are compatible with the town of Portland. And I think also considering who would actually do them or be responsible for them. I think the specifics about specific projects, I think is work for the town planner, but I think it's also future work for the commissioners as to whether you want to proactively create a new districts, zoning districts, new regulations, and if you want to land them in any specific places to prepare for, let's say, a closure of a public building or a building that you know might be significant. So, and of course, a property owner would be welcome and free to propose their own zoning amendments for you to consider as well. But I think the process of the specifics of what exactly building you want to do, maybe to be remodeled or reused for affordable housing, that question is important. And if you have specific examples that you'd like to identify, you could identify this in this plan. But if you don't, I would keep it more open and allow the town to have the flexibility to, when these opportunities come up, to deal with them. But I would recommend that if this is something that you think legitimately is a concern, having regulations adopted at some point, I think would be helpful in advance.
I think what I was trying to convey was, if we agree with, let's say, for example, the adaptive reuse strategy as it's laid out here, could we add, do we add something to our regulations to say that we're receptive to this? Or, I mean, do you put something in there to let people know that, you know, we're interested in doing this kind of thing? Or it's just there, like we just say, you know, this says, explore adaptive reuse opportunities to repurpose existing buildings into affordable housing. Well, I mean, I think we can all agree with that, but then what do we do with that?
Well, and there's two action steps that basically say the planning commission will work with staff to review potential vacant or unused structures.
Mm-hmm.
And the town will seek collaborations on local housing nonprofits in the pursuit of adaptation of reuse opportunities in affordable housing. So there's a two-part. One is the zoning,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps, and the regulations, and the other is that the town would seek for developers to refurbish these.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a hand-in-hand kind of a thing. It's hard to separate. It's like a chicken and the egg kind of thing, you know, in terms of which comes first. But certainly, if you endorse that, then that would be something that we would work on as we look at the future of Portland and some of the buildings.
So, just because I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
if we endorse it and it gets approved by the town with the Board of Selectmen, how much of this document would be actually like set in stone versus, like, say we find something we want to add to it, or we want to like say that this isn't working or isn't going to work for Portland? Can we remove it, or do we have to wait every 5 years to review that?
Sam, can it be modified?
I can take that question.
Please.
Yeah, so that's a good question. This is first of all, this is the first time that this is the first round of the creation of new plans for the state of Connecticut. So the state doesn't, so there's no set way to write these plans yet. There's no set process. This is the first time we're doing it, and we still have our training wheels on. But what I can say is that one of Rivercox towns, the town of Essex, approved right after this regulation, this law went into effect in 2018. They created a plan, and because of the regional effort to do plans for the rest of the towns, they decided to avail themselves of that, and they're doing an early update. There's no time scale, a timeline, except for the fact that you have 5 years until you have to update it. But you can update it as many times as you'd like, as frequently as you'd like, and nothing is set in stone. If you'd like to add approaches or withdraw approaches, you are free to do so.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to know. Also, the plan of conservation and development is due to be revised for 2026. This would be an addendum to it and would be added to it at some point in time. So, you know, yeah, revisions for sure. I mean, it's continuous improvement, isn't it? We're always trying to get better and do things I think it's a good start.
My recommendation would be, as you're preparing and working on your 2026 plan of conservation development, that you look at the housing chapter of that document as your 830J plan, and make sure that as part of the larger plan of conservation development, to address the issue of how the town is going to address expansion of upgrades for affordable housing in town. And then when you are due for the updated plan in June of 2027, you're ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you, I'm having a hard time for some reason grasping what number 3 would look like. The incentives for deed restricted affordable units and new developments in this town, where we have very little public water and sewer.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm just wondering what that, you know, if I'm going to endorse number 3, what am I endorsing there? What does that look like? What does that mean?
I can take that on. Well, it could be most directly if it's, let's say it's a piece of property that the town controls, that the town could go with a developer who will pursue deed restricted affordable housing. You could also allow for greater density or flexibility in your regulations, future regulations that you could adopt that prioritizes developers who come with proposals that include deed restricted affordable housing. You are correct. Public water and sewer in Portland and a lot of the River Cog region is not. It doesn't cover every street. It doesn't cover vast. It covers only a small portion of our towns in our region. So that is going to be a concern across the region, except for maybe Middletown, which has, at least in the built-up areas, has sewer and water. So it's going to be a case-by-case situation where you can accommodate that density. It doesn't mean you can't. If you have the right soils, you can build more densely. But it does make it more difficult. And in River Cog's work representing our member municipalities in front of the General Assembly, we point out these issues regularly. That density is a way of being able to produce housing for a lower cost, but density can only be accommodated in very specific places with very good soils, or in places that have public infrastructure.
So it's possible because of the topography of Portland that having denser development or deed restricted new development, it might not be a good thing to have on our plan because we can't do it. I'm not saying we can't, but I know that we've got a river, we've got a floodplain, we've got the state forest, we've got a lot of ledges and hills and things, and we do have a lack of public water and public sewer. So, maybe that is not something that we could even endorse because we might not ever be able to do it. What we might do is endorse or change to number 2, which is the adaptive reuse, is to include an action item that we might restrict the deed on the refurbishing of buildings. Would that make sense? Could that be a and again,
I just would clarify that the town can't restrict the deed on private property. The property owner would have to agree to that.
Right.
But I also think that even though there may not be many opportunities in the town
right.
for provide density bonuses for providing affordable units, it doesn't mean that it's impossible.
That it's impossible. Okay.
And I think what's important here is to keep in mind that this is the first time that it's being done for the state,
Mm-hmm.
and they're looking for the state's looking for partnership with the towns, identify what the towns think they can do to address these issues, and also be pragmatic and realistic.
Right.
In a state that's not growing in population, it's going to be very hard to have the private sector build large amounts of housing without the population growth. We do have a need for housing, mostly being driven by shrinking household size. So, if you have one 2-person household or two 1-person households, you need double the housing for the same number of people. So, so there is a need for and we've seen generally a need for smaller units. It would be rental units for smaller household sizes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what is keep in mind is that there's no binding mechanism to the town in this plan. It's supposed to be a good faith effort by the town to identify approaches that it sees that it feels are a good fit for addressing this issue. But there is no metric, or there is a metric, I guess, number of units, but there's no hard goal. But I think in 5 years, when or if the state assesses everyone's progress, I think long as you've identified, pragmatic approaches that are not completely out of whack with the town, I think you'll be okay. There's only so much housing in this valley you can build through its housing authority, and most of our housing in this country is private. So we are at the demand of the private developer to a great extent.
I have a question for our chairman.
Yes.
Just, so a lot of this is really, as a representative of this committee, right? A lot of this has really nothing to do with this committee. And some of these things, right?
Yes.
They really are not in our purview, and
I would agree.
and then it would fall to personal opinion if I were to endorse it. Is that, it's not really, like, some of the, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
here's the way I look at it. You mentioned item number 3, and the way it's worded is consider incentives. So what we're endorsing is the fact that we will consider incentives. We're not, at this point, committing to any sort of incentives or anything, just the fact that we're willing to consider them.
what about number 4?
Number 4. So we
What, because that to me feels less like it has to do
right, I agree.
with
Right,
planning
right.
and zoning, so
That's not
how,
Right.
Yeah, I think Meg said that we should look at 1, 2, and 3 for us.
Yeah, I think 4, 5, all of the ones, the subheadings, I think those are all town issues,
so you're not
certainly-
looking for our endorsement on those issues,
Right.
is that correct?
I would think, Sam, is that right? Would they endorse 1, 2, and 3 as planning zoning endorsements at this point? Because that's pretty much the wheelhouse that those 3 are in. I don't.
Yeah, I would suggest an endorsement, especially if the board of selectmen is going to be voting.
Yeah.
So this is another oversight in the law. It doesn't clearly delineate who adopts this plan.
It doesn't.
It just says the town.
Right.
So in some municipalities, the decision has been made,
Right.
planning and zoning would adopt the plan. In other municipalities, the board of selectmen would adopt the plan. I think if I hear correctly, that the board of selectmen will be meeting and voting on this. What I would recommend would be for planning and zoning to recommend, and then leave it for the board of selectmen to adopt.
That makes sense.
And the reason I say that is because unless there was like a specific delegation of power from the board of selectmen, or something in the charter or the statutes that the town attorney identifies, that might be the best approach.
Okay. Does that clarify things?
Kind of.
I don't know.
Well, to me, the way I'm looking at it is, really, we should be recommending or endorsing what's in our wheelhouse, which is one.
Well, these are all considerations. This is not saying you must do this.
Right.
This is not saying, you've got to do this and you've got to add 4 more things to it. In fact, I would recommend that anything that says to add more to it, we wouldn't add anything to it. We would remove, like, for instance, under number 3, action steps. I think just accepting that statement, endorsing that statement, that you will work on a case-by-case basis and consider deed-restricted affordable units in a new development if it were to be presented to you. I think that's the only action that you can really take. And at that point, those would fall into your area of recommendation or approval. The rest of it is really up to the town to make sure that they are transparent about affordable housing and about if they need a housing committee or they want to, further do educational things. That could be, there are groups in town that are working and talking about housing in general, affordable and low income and homelessness. They've done, the Solidarity Coalition on Solidarity has done 4 different programs through the library about housing. So it's, informative. Maybe that's the group that could be the educational group. But that's not for me to say. That would not be That's a personal opinion at this point, just knowing that they have been working on getting information out to the public.
I think if we add or endorse any part of this, I think we'd want to add in some type of language saying that none of these are binding on the town in any way other than they're just kind of general goals or directives, like a larger scope to kind of, so that way when, like, say, the Board of Selectmen change in 2 years, possibly, then you would, you know, they would still have something that they could look back to and understand what the intent of this document was going forward. So that, like, say, like, when you look at 5.5, it's a, you know, they don't say, oh, it's, you don't have to look at it every 5 years. They can say that, you know, we can add in, suggest we add in language where it's a, you know, Portland will review this as necessary and change and adopt it, you know, as it deemed fits, rather than saying every 5 years we're going to just only look at it then.
If you go to the last page, 5.4 and 5.5 pretty much say that. They basically say the planning commission the planning commission should ensure that the affordable housing plan is incorporated into the PC&D, the POCD, and also the implementation. This is a starting point and a guide for potential future changes to town zoning regulations and policy, and it's required by Section 830J. So that is I think that is the statement that you want to say, is that we're starting here. It's a recommended plan. It's a guide as such, and there is not a clear-cut agency that's going to have to be implementing any of this. It's a town. Does that help?
Move that to the front. instead
We
of
could move that. We could move that to the
back.
front. Maybe. We could.
Like that.
But I think that's your exit ramp, so to speak, without going into specifics or worrying about a specific project.
I
Right?
think that, if I could just jump in. I think
Sure. Thanks,
a
Matt.
couple of other towns, we talked about these plans and sort of figuring out where they fit and what to do with them. And sometimes it's easy to think about it similarly to an S-24 referral from the Board of Selectmen. You can review this and determine that it's consistent and supportive of the POCD. So you're not, it aligns with the policies that you establish as a commission,
Right.
but you're not single-handedly deciding that you want to endorse and move these forward immediately. I think that a lot of these things fall in the same vein of some of the sections of POCD that are written. So on a broad scale, you can endorse those policies to be consistent with what you are trying to accomplish as a group.
So if you were to endorse tonight, what would that look like? What would the language, what should the language be? Maybe Sam and Michael could
That's what I was trying
Could
to work
help.
through in my head too, yeah.
Can we kind of craft some kind of a statement that everybody can be comfortable with and move this
And
on?
it sounds like there's a need for like a preface that sort of states that, and I think I think the overall goal here is, first of all, the state didn't give most of the towns, didn't give most towns any funding for this project.
Right.
Not only that, in their wisdom at the General Assembly, they even shortened the deadline for some odd reason. Originally, the deadline was June 30th, and then last session they decided that it should be June 1st.
June
which
1st.
is kind of strange. I think this go around, this is about a statement of saying the town is going to work on this issue and identifying things that we'll consider implementing and working on over the next 5 years. And I think clarifying that maybe in the preface or a statement at the beginning is a good idea.
Yeah, I think so.
So as new commissioners come on the land use commission, as the Board of Selectmen changes, or selectmen changes, or whatever, whoever new comes in, a town planner, they will know exactly what this is and what it isn't.
I think,
Good point.
I think that maybe something about that we'll begin to review existing regulations around some of these issues, and maybe we could commit to, starting that process as a commission. And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I think didn't we already start looking at that? anyway?
But I mean, really, like,
The
as
ADU.
part of this endorsement, like,
Yeah.
it, so expand knowledge of the town's existing ADU regulations. So, maybe we endorse that, but we maybe start really looking at it, actively looking at it, so that we are very kind of familiar with it and kind of are working on that. Because there are other things that I don't think we can do anything with, but certainly those we could have an action plan around. Maybe that would be part of how we would write this up. We will look at this. We'll pay attention to review the existing regulations with this in mind. And that could be part of the language of the endorsement, so that we're not necessarily saying, okay, we're gonna go ahead and do this, but we are saying that we're definitely gonna look at our existing regulations with these things in mind. And that, we word it that way somehow.
And I think that's what I was thinking when I was saying, I was talking about, like, can we just kind of incorporate the concept of this into our regulations to just acknowledge that it's here? But it's just, basically, it's a separate document, so it doesn't have to be it's not part of our regulations, but it's something that we need to consider.
Yeah, that we need to become, right.
So planning and zoning endorses the town of Portland Affordable Housing Plan as zoning, as a guide to consider when ruling on matters of zoning and development. That puts it on a case by case. Sam, Mike?
It may be adding it to the planning as well, because you could potentially add such a statement to your planning conservation development
Right.
as well.
Okay.
So I would say that the approaches that identified in the 830J plan will be considered as part of the zoning and planning activities of the commission.
Okay, it will be considered part of the zoning and planning.
Well, I think, the items that are relevant to your action and the action of the commission, I think, a statement saying that this will be considered and reviewed, or taken into consideration.
Okay, plan to be taken into consideration. All right, so let's see what we have.
And considering that a lot of the recommendations are to actually consider ideas, you'd be considering consideration, but I think the safest route would be something that does not necessarily, that allows the commission and the town the space to figure this out, because the state has not provided a great amount of guidance here.
Right. It's yeah. Mm-hmm. What's this? Anybody want to take a shot at this, or should I do this again?
Yeah, if you would, play that back for me, and I'll try and write it down, so.
All right. So planning and zoning endorses the town of Portland Affordable Housing Plan as a guide to consider, to consider. Yeah, I've written it down too many times here. To consider the affordable plan will be considered in the town. Help us out, Sam. I've written down 3 things here and it doesn't make any sense. Okay, as a guide to consider the planning and zoning, the zoning and planning.
The planning and zoning activities.
Activities.
Yeah.
Activities.
because the activities would include actions, would include new POCD, it would include rezoning,
Right.
creation, it would, all the work that the commission does.
So, look at the language under 5.5, and
Right.
we can more or less just mimic that.
You can almost mimic that, right.
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
That really,
says it.
that
says
is
it
really
all.
what we want
Yeah.
you to do.
Yeah, and I think when Rob said move that to the front, I think that's.
Yeah, and there will be, that should be the preamble to,
Yeah.
all of the,
Yeah, I like that.
And maybe instead of represent a starting point and guideline, that should be a starting point for guidelines. So that you're not calling it a guideline, you're calling it a starting point for guidelines. It's subtle, but it's a big difference.
I'm okay with that.
The only other change I would say is that on the second sentence where it says as required by general
Yeah.
statute section, 8-30J, this plan will be updated every 5 years. You can add in from time to time as
As
deemed
needed.
necessary.
Yeah.
So that way it doesn't lock anyone into saying it's, 5 years, every 5 years has to be done. It would say, well, if we find that it needs to change it, we can.
Okay.
Actually, that might be a good approach to include in the document itself, that the town and the Planning and Zoning Commission will review this document regularly for amendments and changes.
I think I like the way Robert put it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I have is this plan will be updated every 5 years or as needed.
yeah. Are we changing the and to for?
Yes.
For
Guidelines.
guidelines.
I guess you would have to say for guidelines,
To.
to
Of
potential, to potential future changes.
Of town regulations.
Right,
Oh dear.
Of potential
Of-
future changes?
So it would be the recommendations of this plan represent a starting point for guidelines to potential future changes of town zoning regulations and policies.
And because Sam, you mentioned planning as well, do we want to put planning in there?
Since this commission is responsible for planning as well, it makes sense.
Okay, so town zoning regulations, planning, and policies.
You could say town planning and zoning regulations.
Town planning and zoning,
I
okay.
think that's. Yeah.
Okay. And then I think where there are action items to be included, I think I would just remove those gray areas that 2, 3, 1, 2, and then all of the action items under 3, 1 through 3, 4. I would just remove those.
I think that the action steps 1, 2, this is where like the review of existing regulations with ADUs in mind, like I think that's where
Do you want to put an
there's
action item in
something, I
that
don't
said to
know how
review?
everybody feels about that, but that's like, that's, you know, that would be what we would do,
So,
right?
I think what you're saying is they are written as if they're really binding for the action items. What we could do is, for the heading where it says action steps, we can make them proposed action steps. So that way they're not necessarily, something that's completely binding on us, but it's this is what we're proposing as a possible solution to it, rather than saying this is we will do this.
Yeah. And then we could add review to action items 1.2 could be review existing regulations. And 2.3 could be review existing regulations. So, but under the heading proposed action steps.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm getting
Is
behind.
that okay? So we'll put proposed action steps, so we'll put the word proposed in front of all of these,
Yeah.
and then just review existing. regulations. Okay. And there'll only be under 3, there'll only be one that says to review. Okay. All right.
Well, 3, that wouldn't really be anything to review because that would,
Yeah, we don't
there,
have
there,
it.
All right, so
That-
nothing,
that would be
nothing,
on a
there would be no-
case-by-case
okay,
thing.
so no, right, it would be
Yeah.
under, so nothing under 3, all right.
Right.
So proposed action statements, steps would be on 1 and 2. 3, we're gonna add in 1, 2, and 2, 3 under those items. All right, and then the rest of it belongs to the Board of Selectmen.
Except for 5.5,
Except
which
for
is out in
5,
front, right?
5.4 and 5.5.
5.4?
5.4 is
5.4 is
putting it
just
into
to
the
include it in the plan of
conservation.
conservation and development.
Now, this might sound like a silly question. Are we gonna be sending the version that, with all these revisions, like made and finalized over to the town? Or are we gonna be sending them like a red line version showing our changes to this?
Do you think Megan and Karen will want a red line version of this with the changes? Probably. Okay. I can get with Megan. I'll make the changes. I think I can edit the document.
And also, if the recording of this discussion be made available to them, either by the commission or by Mike, that might be helpful as well.
So,
Yes.
So I'll relay my notes and then
Okay. All right, and I've written it all down. I did write it down. I did. I should have brought my red pen tonight. I didn't.
Well, isn't
No,
that-
thank you.
so-
I know this is a lot, and it's a good thing, but there is a lot here to digest.
So I will take a shot at reading the motion, and then we'll discuss it before we vote on it. Okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. So, motion to endorse that the recommendations of this plan represent a starting point for guidelines to potential future changes to town planning and zoning regulations and policies. As required by CGS Section 8-30J, this plan will be updated every 5 years or as often as needed.
yeah. And do we have to, and when you said something about the red line version, when we endorse it, we're endorsing the version that,
all
with the changes
With
that
all
we
the
made,
changes,
right? So
yeah.
does that have to be part of the motion? That
No.
it's the version that we talked about, or is that implied?
No, and the red line version is going to be for Megan so that she can see the changes that were made. So the words that you're putting in will be inserted, and we'll take out like the and the of or whatever.
The
I think
revised version.
Victoria is just looking for assurance that we're endorsing the revised version of this document. Is that basically?
Yeah, I'm just wondering it's a procedural question,
Right.
really, just wondering.
But I think if we can all come to an agreement that we are approving the revised, or endorsing the revised version of this document,
Right.
Yes.
then I think we'll be good.
I think
That's
we're
on the
good.
record.
Thank you for,
Yes. Afterwards, or now? Yeah. Sure. Okay. So I'll make the motion then? If everybody comfortable for it? I'll read it one more time. Okay? Motion to endorse that the recommendations of this plan represent a starting point for guidelines to potential future changes to town planning and zoning regulations and policies. As required by CGS Section 8-30J, this plan will be updated every 5 years or as often as needed. May I have a second to the motion?
A second.
Okay, Rob got it? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion is approved then. So, thanks, Meg.
All right, thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks,
This is
Meg.
a lot of work. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Michael. I'll make sure that we get you back a copy with the corrected language in it.
Okay, thank you.
We're good.
And Megan will be back in the office on Monday.
On Monday, okay. So I'll go down and see.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. That was good.
What are you apologizing?
That was good discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll now move to the other category. So, application 21-12, amendments to the Town of Portland zoning regulations. I'm not going to read that whole thing, but the public hearing is scheduled for May 19th. Okay,
Okay, and we're taking off,
Yeah.
we took off the
She took it
cannabis.
out. She took it out.
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Okay. Next item is public comment. The commission will hear brief comments from any members of the public at this time. So anyone here in the room or anyone in chat? Nobody in chat. Anybody in the room? Any public comments? No? Okay, hearing none. Next item is to approve the minutes of April 21st. And present at that meeting were myself, Chantel, Rob, Tom, Carolyn, and Victoria. So does anyone have any corrections to the minutes? Okay, then, may I have a motion to approve the minutes? And a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved, and may I have a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
please? And a second? All in favor, aye,
Aye.
opposed?
All right, thank you, Bob.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Yep, that has to go to Dawn. I'll give it to Dawn.
Okay.
Did you,